Welcome back to the Dear Monday podcast. I'm TuRhonda Freeman. This season began as a conversation about decisions, the ones we plan for, the ones we wrestle with, the ones we choose deliberately, sometimes slowly, always with something at stake. Over the last 4 episodes, we've been inside 2 of those decisions. We talked about Erin, who is evaluating a franchise commitment. She has the information, the access, the process. She's been learning to tell the difference between what the process can give her and what she has to build herself, between certainty and clarity. We talked about Allison, who has already decided. She's leaving a corporate career she built over years. And she's been sitting with the gap between knowing what she needs to do and actually doing it, between strategic patience and something that looks like it but isn't. Both of them are making hard choices, significant ones, but both of them are making those choices from solid ground. There's a third woman in this conversation. Her ground moved without her permission. This episode, we talk about Renee. So who is Renee? Renee is not starting from scratch. She's starting from experience, from years of work that taught her how things operate, how decisions are made, how risk shows up, sometimes quietly, sometimes all at once. She didn't choose disruption, but she is the one who has to respond to it. And this is where most people misunderstand this moment. Because when the ground shifts, it's easy to believe that control has been lost entirely, that the disruption defines what happens next, that because she didn't choose this, she doesn't get to choose what comes after it. But that's not true. Renee is not responsible for what happened. She is responsible for what happens next. And those are not the same thing. The disruption is a fact. What she builds on it is still hers to determine. That distinction between what was done to her and what she does next is the most important conversation in this episode. And it's the one that's easiest to lose sight of when the pressure arrives, because the pressure does arrive. So let's talk about the pressure of the in-between. Let me name what Renee is actually carrying right now, because I think it goes further than most conversations about disruption are willing to go. There is financial pressure, yes. Whatever income the disruption removed, the timeline to replace it is real. The math doesn't pause for clarity. The household doesn't pause for clarity. Bills arrive on the same schedule they always did, regardless of where she is in the process of figuring out what comes next. There is time pressure. Every week inside this in-between is a week she is not building, not generating, not moving. And the awareness of that accumulates in ways that are hard to describe to someone who hasn't been there. A low, persistent urgency that sits underneath every conversation, every morning, every decision she's trying to make carefully. And there's something quieter, and in some ways more significant than any of these. Disruption doesn't just affect income. It affects identity. Renee didn't just lose a role. She lost a rhythm, a structure, a version of herself that knew what tomorrow looked like, that had a place to be, a title that organized how she moved through the world, a daily shape that gave her a sense of forward motion. And when that disappears, people don't just look for opportunity, they look for stability. Stability is a natural human need for something that feels like control again, for the relief of having an answer, any answer to the question of what comes next. And this is where decisions become dangerous. Because when you're solving for the feeling of stability, rather than the structure of a sound decision, you quiet the moment. You create exposure over time. So, not movement at all is not progress. I want to say something directly because I think it's the thing Renee most needs to hear in this moment. Movement is not the same as progress. I'm going to say that again. Movement is not the same as progress. And rebuilding is not automatically improvement. There is a version of rebuilding that looks exactly like forward motion. She's doing something. She has a plan. She's not sitting still, but is actually solving for the in between rather than solving for the next chapter. It addresses the urgency, it quiets the pressure, but it doesn't build toward the life she actually wants. And then she finds herself 12 or 18 months from now in a different version of the exact same conversation. The instinct to move quickly when the ground shifts is understandable. Trust me, I've been there. I'm not dismissing it. But the moment that feels most urgent is often the moment that requires the most restraint. Here's the specific danger for someone in Renee's position. She has experience, real experience. She has seen how decisions work, how risk shows up, how things operate inside organizations and markets and commitments of real size. That experience is genuine. It is an asset she has to be careful with because experience can be deceptive. What worked before was built on conditions that may no longer exist. The market has changed. Her financial position has changed. Her capacity, what she can carry, what she can absorb, what she can sustain, may be different than what it was when the old framework was working. And if she applies the same old experience to the new reality without checking whether the conditions still hold, she won't be rebuilding forward. She'll be rebuilding backward towards something that no longer fits the version of her life she's actually in. So the question isn't what works. The question is what still works now. That word now is doing significant work. It is asking her to apply her experience to her current reality, not her previous one. To let what she knows inform the decision without letting it override the honest assessment of where she currently is. So, let's talk about the discipline of a pause. This is where discipline begins, not in the decision itself, in the pause before it. Because Renee's advantage in this moment, and she does have an advantage, her experience, her judgment, her ability to read situations only works if she gives it room to operate. The urgency of the in between is working against that room constantly. So here's the question I want her to sit with, the one that cuts through the urgency without dismissing it. Given what has changed, what must be true for the next decision to be sound. Not optimistic, not convenient, sound. And that's a harder question than it looks because optimistic is easy to come by when you need relief from the in between. Convenient is easy when you need movement. Sound requires different movement. It requires her to look at what she's actually working with, her liquidity, her capacity, her options, and ask whether the next commitment she's considering holds up under honest scrutiny. So let me make this concrete. Does this path protect her liquidity or strain it? Not what the projections say, what the realistic timeline says. What happens to her financial position if this takes longer to generate than she planned? Because things often do. Can she hold that? Or does the commitment put her in a position where she has no room to adjust? Does it give her options or take them away? A sound decision in a disrupted position preserves optionality. It doesn't foreclose every other option in the process of solving. For one, if this doesn't work the way she expects, or if something changes that she can't predict right now, does she still have room to move? Or has she committed in a way that makes the next pivot more expensive than the one she's trying to make right now? Is it reversible if needed? Some commitments are easier to exit than others. She should know before she enters the next one what it costs to leave. Not because she's planning to leave, but because the cost of exit is part of the true cost of entry. Commitments that are difficult to unwind deserve more scrutiny, not less. When she's rebuilding from a disrupted position, does it align with the capacity she actually has right now? Not the capacity she had before, not the capacity she intends to rebuild, the capacity she has now, financially, operationally, personally. Commitments that require more than she currently has to give are not wrong by definition, but she should choose them with eyes open, not discover the gap after the commitment is made. These are not easy questions, and they're not designed to be. They're designed to keep disruption from becoming long-term damage. To make sure the decision she makes inside the in-between is one she'd recognize as sound from outside it, not just from inside the urgency. So what she's actually building, we'll bring it back to Renee one last time. Some people stand at the edge of a decision. Others are walking away from one. Renee woke up and realized the decision had already been made for her. And now the question is not what she planned. It's what she builds next on ground that no longer feels the same, but that is still hers to build on. She has never been further from scratch. She is carrying years of experience, a calibrated sense of what she will and won't accept, and a clarity about what matters that is difficult to earn any other way. And those, my friend, are real assets. They belong in the room with every decision she makes from here. The work is in using them with discipline, in resisting the urgency long enough to ask the harder questions, in knowing the difference between movement and progress, and choosing progress, even when movement feels like relief. You see, when the ground shifts, you don't get to choose the movement. but you do get to choose the structure you rebuild on. The question for this week, one question for when it's quiet enough to answer honestly. Given what has changed, what must be true for the next decision to be sound? Before I go, if you're in Renee's position, if the ground has shifted and you're standing in the in between, feeling the pressure to move, I want to say something. The decision exposure review exists for this moment. It is not only for someone evaluating a franchise or business opportunity, it is for anyone who is approaching a consequential commitment, one that involves significant capital or a departure from stable income, or a long-term agreement that will be difficult to unwind, and you want independent scrutiny before the decision becomes irreversible. When you've been through disruption, the pressure to move is real. In independent analysis, someone who is not inside that urgency, who can map the full exposure of what you're considering with clear eyes, is most valuable, precisely when the stakes are high and the in between is telling you to move faster than the careful looking allows. Before the commitment, when the thinking still belongs entirely to you. I want to invite you to go to www.dearmonday.co. Clarity before commitment. Last but not least, I want to tell you about episode 6. We've now met all 3 women. He talks about Erin at the edge of ownership, Allison at the edge of an exit, and Renee starting from experience in the aftermath of something she didn't choose. 3 different moments, 3 different questions, 3 people making consequential decisions that will change the shape of their lives. And there is something they share, something that lives underneath every major ownership decision, regardless of where you're standing when you make it. It's not in the pitch deck. It doesn't appear in the financial projections. It doesn't come up in any discovery day. It's the obligation nobody mentions, the weight underneath the opportunity. Next week, we stop following one woman and look at what all 3 have in common. Episode 6, we invite all 3 of them to the decision room right here at Dear Monday. I'll see you then.